Wanted to welcome everyone back to the Pakistan Policy Symposium. This is our panel on U.S.-Pakistan relations. I think that our opening address from Henry Escher provided some useful context for this discussion, which again will focus on U.S.-Pakistan relations. I'd argue that the bilateral relationship is in a strange and somewhat awkward place today. It's not plagued by any type of serious crisis, as was the case, for example, back in 2011, when there were multiple crises, but it's struggling. I think that's quite clear, and we heard that articulated by Mr. Escher. There's clearly mounting frustration on the U.S. side that Pakistan is not addressing Washington's long-standing concerns about Afghanistan-focused terrorists. And on the Pakistani side, there's unhappiness about the actions of the Trump administration side. These tensions are heightened by a Trump administration that has vowed to take a harder line on Pakistan. I think it bears noting that aside from several things like a suspension of security assistance, which is not an unprecedented measure, the administration really has not followed up on that threat, at least not yet. We're starting the panel, so if everyone could try to quiet down and focus on the stage, that would be great. So the question with this panel is, how can the U.S.-Pakistan relationship best function in a difficult environment? What should or can be the contours of cooperation moving forward? And to be sure, there's a lot of talk about how the two sides should find a way to partner on a potential peace process in Afghanistan. And our next panel after lunch will focus on this issue. But on this panel, the interest is broader. The question is, how far can this relationship realistically go, and what should it look like? Is cooperation actually viable? And if so, what should it look like, and what should it revolve around? So we've got a great panel comprised of 2 Pakistanis and 2 Americans. I'll be very brief in my introductions of them. They are from my left to right, but that's not the order that they're going to speak in. Laurel Miller, who is a senior foreign policy expert at the RAND Corporation. As many of you know, she was the acting special representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan at the State Department until June 2017. And she was at the RAND Corporation prior to that from 2009 to 2013, leading and participating in a series of studies on a wide range of issues. David Sedney is a non-resident fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies here in D.C. He was the acting president of the American University of Afghanistan in 2016 and 2017. Significantly, he was U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Central Asia between 2019 and 2013. We also have with us on the Pakistani side Ambassador Salman Bashir, who is a career diplomat. He was Pakistan's foreign secretary and ambassador to a number of countries, including Denmark and China, and he was also the High Commissioner to India. And then finally, we will have Dr. Hassan Askari Rizvi, a political analyst and professor emeritus in political science at Punjab University in Lahore. He's published very widely on a number of issues relating to Pakistan and South Asian affairs. And he was also, most recently, as many of you will know, a caretaker chief minister of Punjab. So we're going to get to them in just a few moments. But first, something we're going to be doing for several of our panels over the next few days is to have what we're describing as a spotlight speaker. This is essentially someone whose job is to make some very brief remarks that set the stage for the panel discussions. And so when we say spotlight, we're really talking about spotlighting the panel topic, not the speaker, though of course our spotlight speakers are worth spotlighting as well. So our spotlight speaker this morning for this initial panel will be someone who's very familiar to those that study Pakistan, U.S.-Pakistan relations. That's Shuja Nawaz, who is a distinguished fellow at the Atlantic Council South Asia Center, and he was previously the center's first director. So I'd like to invite Shuja Nawaz to come up to the podium and offer some brief remarks.
Thank you very much, Michael. It's always a pleasure to be at the Wilson Center, and for those of you that follow Pakistan and the region, we were together just a few weeks ago. I'm also delighted to be on the same stage as a number of my friends and people I respect who have been working this space for the last so many years, as many of us have been almost like the blind man and the elephant, putting our hands on this animal and determining what its shape is and what its nature is. I look at the US-Pakistan relationship through the lens of a literary person, George Bernard Shaw, who wrote a play about marriage between unequal partners. And the play was called Misalliance. And so I think that term probably best describes this relationship over its 70-year history, where it has been an unequal relationship, and a relationship where both sides have been complicit in ignoring the basic principles of their friendship and their agreements, and ignoring them when they needed to be brought front and center and resolved, and kicking the can down the road whenever it suited both sides. And particularly from the US perspective, and particularly after 2001, we've seen a lack of will on the part of the United States to define the purpose behind the invasion of Afghanistan, and to keep that consistent and upfront so that it could be resolved. And the symptom of that is evident in the fact that today we are discussing Pakistan-US relationship, but Afghanistan is setting the agenda. And I don't have to spell out all the details of the history of this conflict, which is not just since 2001. It's a conflict that has been going on for 40 years. And it's a conflict in which Pakistan has suffered and continues to suffer and will continue to suffer, because the generational effects of what has happened to Pakistan, the radicalization inside the country, the youth that are exposed to drugs and to the presence of arms in Pakistani society, is one of those immeasurable costs that cannot be calculated and cannot be reimbursed for. And I think that is something to keep in mind. I was very happy that Mr. Ensher talked about the $1 trillion or thereabouts that have been spent on the war in Afghanistan. Well, of this, Pakistan, according to President Trump, has received something like $33 billion since 2001. So, and even those were not financial aid. They were primarily military related and primarily under the Coalition Support Funds arrangement, which I've said repeatedly was a bad arrangement at the outset and continues to be a bad arrangement going forward. Talking about deaths, military deaths in particular, yes, the United States has suffered a lot in Afghanistan, but Pakistan has 4 times as many military deaths over the same period. And that shouldn't be ignored, and 80,000 total casualties since this war began. So that's another thing to keep in mind. What did the US get out of this relationship? Well, first of all, the basis of this relationship, which was, as I said, an unequal relationship, was the fact that the United States and the lawyers in the Pentagon produced agreements that would be unreadable in the best of circumstances, but when you put pressure on the leadership of a country and say, tell us whether you're with us or against us, and give us a decision yesterday, then it's even harder to determine whether that agreement will work or not. And the leadership within the Pentagon itself was often unable to understand all the details that were put into those agreements, which so favored the United States that for the airlines of communication, the airlocks, where Pakistan, according to their calculation, feels that something like well over 2 million sorties supporting the war in Afghanistan have gone through Pakistan airspace, and there was no charge for that. The ground lines of communication, there was no charge except to the contractors carrying the goods from Karachi to Torkham or to Quetta and beyond Chaman. There was no charge for that. The loss of Pakistan's infrastructure, there was no charge for that. The attrition of equipment, the losses by the Pakistani military, again, because of their own miscalculation that the war would be very short and sweet, and it was just a matter of a couple of years, and we'll probably skim off a little bit of money as profit, didn't happen. And so Pakistan's calculation, which is open to questioning, is that they've suffered maybe somewhere between 120 and 180 billion dollars worth of losses as a result of their involvement in this war with Afghanistan. So this is sort of the background against which the hedging occurred, the questions about the U.S. Desire to stay and fight. President Obama's wrong decision, in my view, to declare a date certain by which the U.S. would start leaving Afghanistan, because what terrified the Pakistanis most was not the fact that the U.S. was sitting in Afghanistan, but the fact that they would leave suddenly and that they would again be confronted with an enormous civil war inside Afghanistan, which would spill over into Pakistan. And in addition to the 3.5 million original refugees, there'd be additional refugees pouring across the border. And Pakistan was unable to staunch that flow from Afghanistan at any time in its history. And in fact, nobody can. For those of you that are from the region and know it well, there are 240 some passes and ways in which you can travel between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And it's impossible, as the Soviets discovered, and as the US and Pakistan have discovered, to seal those boundaries. So it is this unequal relationship where when it suited one party, it remained mum, and when it suited the other party, it remained mum. It's only when President Trump came onto the scene that he suddenly came out with this message that enough was enough and that Pakistan was playing a double game and that we should start cutting ties. That, in my view, would be a serious mistake if this is continued, because Pakistan is far too important a country, not just for its geographic strategic location, but because of its economic potential and as a source of stability for a region which is going to be racked by conflicts and sectarian and ethnic violence, whether it's Central Asia, whether it's Afghanistan, whether it's Iran, or whether it's Kashmir and conflict with India across the international border. All of these are potential hazards, not just for the region, but for the world. But on the plus side, and here I'm as much of an optimist as Mr. Ensher, that I believe the potential for realigning this relationship between the US and Pakistan exists. The potential for coming up with a new compact for the region exists, in which Pakistan, China, India, Afghanistan, Central Asia, and Iran can play a huge role and should play a huge role. Note that in the US strategy, Iran is completely ignored because Iran is the bad guy under the current administration. And I think that's a mistake that needs to be corrected at some point. Now, Michael asked us not to dwell on the past, and I won't, because that's been one of the problems with this relationship, that Pakistanis particularly remember every little bit that happened between the US and Pakistan from the 50s till now, whereas the US forgets every little bit that happened between 1950 and now. And for the US, history starts today. And that's been part of the problem, the structural problem of this. What would I suggest is possible? And I say this against the backdrop of a comment that my friend Dr. Maliha Lodi, who is the Pakistan ambassador at the UN, once said, which is that Pakistan is probably the world's most overdiagnosed country. So everybody knows what's wrong and everybody will tell you what to do. So I'm just going to add a few bits of my advice on how we can move forward if we want to. Because isolating Pakistan, to my mind, is not an option. It's far too important a country to isolate in that part of the world. And 220 million angry Pakistanis is not something you want to deal with. First of all, let's remove some issues from the table. Let's remove the coalition support funds issue. It's a meaningless amount. $300 million for Pakistan is nothing. I say that again. $300 million for Pakistan, in the immortal words of General Ziaul Haq, is peanuts. And Pakistan should take that step, not the US. The US has already done what it could. It said, we're not giving you any money. Pakistan should say, we don't want the CSF, and neither do we want the arrears that you've been sitting on for the last 2 years. So let's remove this. If you want to help us, let's talk about the economy. Let's talk about important equipment for our forces. Give us the helicopters that you haven't given us for the last 18 years, 17 years that we've been wanting. Instead of the measly 22 helicopters that you gave us, which don't even operate well at high altitudes or in summer, give us the attack helicopters that you said you didn't have. And then suddenly, when you wanted to set up an Afghan Air Force, you found 150 of them overnight. So live up to your words that you're going to be our friend. Give us the tools, we'll do the job. Secondly, remove Shakil Afridi as an issue. He's already done his time. He's the only person in Pakistan who was caught and sentenced by a so-called court. I say so-called because it was a tribal court which gave summary judgment. The US would like him to be freed, and Capitol Hill would be very happy that this issue is resolved. Why not let him leave the country? And if you want an exchange to calm down the right-wing Islamists inside the country, take back Dr. Afia Siddiqui and let her serve some of her time in a Pakistani jail. Maybe they won't like that either, but at least you've eliminated 2 points of contention. Third, let the US, instead of quibbling about the IMF, say we will use the IMF to help put Pakistan back on the road to economic recovery. And not only that, but we will use the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank also. And then we will do what Mr. Enshaw promised, which is set up the investment opportunities for US companies to do the trick. So let that be the future path where you are telling Pakistan, we know you have the solutions, we want you to implement them, improve your fiscal conditions, get your growth rate going, and then, if you want, you'll be spending a smaller proportion of your growing pie on the military. You can spend much more than you're currently spending. We can help you do that, but you have to get your economy in order, and that should be a top priority. Finally, Pakistan needs to take some actions to take advantage of its economic location, not simply for military and strategic purposes. This is the connectivity idea. And again, the ball is in Pakistan's court. There are actions that Pakistan can and should take unilaterally. For instance, opening the border with India, letting the Afghan Transit Trade Agreement extend to India, so that Afghanistan can prosper, Central Asia can prosper, and India and Pakistan can prosper by not being at loggerheads. The advantage for Pakistan in this arrangement is that as India finds itself dependent on this route, which is faster, cheaper, more productive, it will not be able to let go, and Pakistan always has this potential to shut off the spigot, and to, if India does anything that Pakistan doesn't like. So there's a basis for discussion and progress going forward. I think this is the future for the region. This is the future for Pakistan. And this is where the US and Pakistan relationship can be put on practical grounds rather than simply rehashing the history. And in the words of Rifat Hussain, who has been attending some of these conferences in the past, Pakistan and the US doesn't have to be like that couple who sleep in the same bed and dream different dreams. They can have the same dreams, and they can actually have a relationship that works, which is not a misalliance. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Shuja Nawaz. It seems like it's hard to have a conversation on U.S.-Pakistan relationship without invoking the marriage metaphor. One hears it so often. So we're going to get into our panel discussion. The original plan had been to start with our Pakistani speakers, but due to unforeseen and urgent circumstances, I believe that David Sedney will need to leave early. So we're going to have you speak first, and then we'll return to the order on that side of the room and then come back to Laurel.
Thank you very much, Michael, and my apologies to my fellow panelists and to the audience as well for the fact that a family emergency has called me. I need to leave at 11:30. I will be back this afternoon attending the Afghanistan session. If people have questions about what I say, I welcome those questions. I look forward to answering them when I return. And again, my deep apologies to everyone here, especially to my distinguished Pakistani colleagues who I would have much preferred to have heard before I spoke. I'm going to cast my remarks a little bit in the light of the two previous speakers, both Henry Ensher and Shuja Nawaz, both made some important points. I have a lot of respect for both of them. I think in the presentation just now, I, however, noted 12 areas where I strongly disagreed with points that were made, and so I'd love to have a long discussion about those in a different forum, because a lot of those are that history that Michael warned us not to get bogged down in. But I think at the same time, you don't want to get bogged down in history. It's especially important for Americans who do forget history all the time to be aware of history. And it is important for us as we look at building a future relationship to be aware of that. One thing that I'd like to stress is the 2 points of priority for U.S. policy that Henry Ensher made. First was terrorism. Second was nuclear issues, particularly nuclear proliferation. Over the past 29 years, meaning since the Soviet pullout in the late 80s, U.S. policy towards Pakistan has been dominated by those two strains. Most of that time, the nuclear issue has been paramount. And if you look back to the sanctions on Pakistan in the 1990s and the impact that had on Pakistan and Pakistan-U.S. relations, it was about the nuclear issue that was the case. During the Obama administration, I sat repeatedly in meetings, including with the very top leaders of the United States, who said our number 1 priority for Afghanistan and Pakistan was Pakistani nuclear weapons, nuclear facilities, and nuclear materials, and the possibility of their being misused, stolen, or otherwise becoming a danger to the world. So the priority of the current administration, putting terrorism first and nuclear issues second, is a different choice than the previous administration made, and a different choice, and there might be a different choice in the future. One thing that I think there's a tendency, and people have remarked upon it, to focus on the issue of Afghanistan in a lot of public fora and writings. I would really urge people who are serious about finding ways to build a long-term constructive relationship between the United States and Pakistan to also focus on the nuclear issue. There are areas in the nuclear field where the U.S. and Pakistan have had some good exchanges, where there's been some positives. And in the longer term, I think there are even more areas where there could be cooperation in this area. I know that there are many people on the Pakistan side that would like to see a nuclear agreement between the U.S. and Pakistan similar to the one that we have with India. That is a very big stretch goal, I personally support such a goal, and I think it is something that should be included in the U.S.-Pakistan relationship. Michael asked for concrete suggestions for the future. I think the goal of such an agreement between the U.S. and Pakistan is possible, but it requires a huge amount of work on both sides and an ability to work with each other through thick and thin, through problems, through good times. It's always easier to work during good times, but also through bad times, to be able to keep our eye on the nuclear football, as it were, regardless of what else is going on in the relationship. That hasn't always been the case. So there have been times in the past 20-some years when we have not had very good communication about nuclear issues. Just to remind people, the country in the world that is producing the most new nuclear weapons right now is Pakistan, the country that has the potential to produce even more nuclear weapons in terms of fissile material and the mechanical engineering expertise is Pakistan. The country that is building the largest range of missiles might well be Pakistan. Iran might be a competitor there, including missiles that can go well beyond areas that Pakistan has ever regarded as its strategic, as has ever publicly said, as part of its strategic calculus. There are a lot of issues in this nuclear and I'm adding missiles here as well, that the United States and Pakistan need to be talking about, should be talking about, and this is not just about terrorism. Of course, this goes to the security of nuclear facilities and nuclear materials as well, something that has been a matter of concern not just for the U.S., but for the rest of the world community over the years. So again, Michael asked us not to be bound by history, and I agree we shouldn't, but we should look at history. And the nuclear issue is an area where we really need to focus a lot more energy than we have in recent past. There are people who are specialists in this area. Some of them may be in this room. There are people here in Washington who have done a lot of work, and a lot of people in Pakistan and the Pakistani nuclear establishment who have done a lot of work, quiet work, that has laid the foundation. But we really need to move forward, I believe, in this area. And that goal of a U.S.-Pakistan nuclear cooperation agreement, as we have with India, is one that we should have, even though we realize it is something that will require a lot of work. So those are the two announced U.S. priorities for the relationship. Looking beyond those two priorities, the U.S.-Pakistan relationship has been fragile and has been buffeted by changes on both sides in leadership and in perspective. And one way to address that is to improve the resiliency of the relationship, to have more strands in the relationship. And this is where I want to congratulate Michael and the Wilson Center and the Indus Foundation for looking for additional areas, additional strands in the relationship to make it stronger. But I'm going to point out an area where I think there is a lot of danger right now. And I'll I'm getting close to my 10 minutes, and so I will make sure I don't go over. But the U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia right now is under huge pressure because of an issue relating to treatment of a journalist. Issues relating to treatment of journalists and freedom of the press in Pakistan are major. The Committee to Protect Journalists last month issued this study. I commend it to everybody who's interested in Pakistan and U.S.-Pakistan relations. It's called Acts of Intimidation. It's on the Committee to Protect Journalists website. It details a whole range of issues. I myself know a number of Pakistani journalists who believe that their lives would be in danger if they were to return to Pakistan, so they don't. I also know Pakistani journalists who are practicing in Pakistan who currently will not report on certain matters because they believe if they do, they will suffer. That's a subset of the issue of the broader issue of human rights, civil society. Some of these Henry Ensher mentioned in his discussion about where Pakistan stands in terms of ease of doing business. And if you look at the current report by Transparency International on perceptions of countries and take a look at the section on Pakistan, I think it's important to do that. Those are areas where I think the United States can work with Pakistan. I think the United States wants to work with Pakistan in these areas, and I think it's important to build in these areas as well. Freedom of press, freedom of expression, human rights, and civil society. I had a little more to say on this, but I'm coming to the end of my 10 minutes, and I'm going to end there. But building more strands. There's going to be a lot of emphasis in the rest of this discussions on the economic side, and I applaud that. And I'm consciously not discussing economic issues, although I acknowledge their huge importance because I think they'll be well covered elsewhere. But the issues that I've mentioned, number one, the nuclear issue. Secondly, building more strands of the relationship, particularly in the area of freedom of press, freedom of speech, human rights, and the building of civil society, and the ability of organizations, both Pakistani and international, to operate in Pakistan. Those are important things that if you have strengths in those areas, the relationship can withstand pressure in others. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, David, and we hope you'll be able to join us for conversations later. Hope all will be well. Let's move on to our Pakistani guests. So we'll start with Dr. Rizvi.
Is it working?
It's on. Yeah, it's
All right. I thank the Wilson Center and the Indus Group for inviting me to share my views on an important topic. We are already discussing US-Pakistan relations in the first session, and also our spotlight speaker talked about the US-Pakistan relations. I'm going to add just few dimensions to the relationship between the two countries. US-Pakistan relationship is a difficult and complex relationship. It's marked by varying degrees of distrust and doubt the two sides express from time to time. And they talk about doubts about each other's goals, although the intensity of doubt and suspicion that exists has varied from time to time. However, if you look at the current dialogue between Pakistan and the United States, you come to the conclusion that despite non-congruence in their objectives or goals about regional and international affairs, they want to continue talking on these issues. The desire is to maintain this relationship because despite differences, this relationship is important for both countries for different set of reasons. Therefore, what you will continue to see in this relationship, that positive and negative interaction will go simultaneously. And you will also experience convergence and divergence in their interaction at the same time. As a matter of fact, this kind of relationship, positive, negative going together, characterizes and marks Pakistan-US relations right from the beginning. However, the relationship appears to have become more turbulent from the last year of the Obama administration and the years of President Trump. This has become more problematic, and there is a noticeable surge in criticism of Pakistan during last 3 years. And in the first session, the issues were raised that are causing conflict or distrust between the two countries. I will not repeat those American grievances against Pakistan. What appears to me is that both share the goal of elimination of terrorism from the region. The divergence comes on two basic issues. What kind of exact policy measures the two countries should adopt to address the threat of terrorism? Second issue that becomes a cause of divergence is how these policy measures, how these policies should be evolved, who should play what kind of role in evolving the policies. They need to evolve a mutually shared approach rather than one country expecting the other to change. In fact, change is required on both sides in terms of outlook, expectations, and also strategies. They both need to change their current strategy. What you need is a comprehensive and all-inclusive view of the problem rather than adopting a selective approach of focusing on certain issues. Major US focus appears to be Afghan Taliban, the Haqqani group, and also Jamaat-ud-Dawa. That appears to be a focus. From Pakistani perspective, all this is one aspect of a multi-dimensional terrorism problem that Pakistan confronts. It also includes, in addition to these, it also includes Tehreek-e-Taliban-e-Pakistan, which is partly based in Afghanistan, and also Pakistan's official claim, and I emphasize the word official claim, that the role of the Afghan and the Indian intelligence agencies in supporting Tehreek-e-Taliban-e-Pakistan and also other violent groups that target Pakistan needs to be taken into account. Therefore, Pakistan talks about internal and external security issues. Now, since Pakistan took action, military action in tribal areas, North Waziristan and other areas, there are no permanent training centers of Afghan Taliban in Pakistan. Again, no permanent, I'm saying. What you see is movement of people across Pakistan-Afghanistan border, and this movement is both ways. Therefore, Afghan Talibans do come to Pakistan. Now, for leadership, it is easy to identify whether leaders are in Pakistan or not in Pakistan. But when it comes to ordinary Afghan fighter, it is not an easy job to distinguish Afghan ordinary fighter in Pakistan from Afghan refugees that are settled in Pakistan and other Afghans who are not registered refugees who are living in Pakistan, and some of them have got Pakistani nationality papers. How do you distinguish them from them? They can easily melt into Afghan refugee camps. Secondly, how do you distinguish them from the local Pashtun population? And some of them have their families in Pakistan or have family links in Pakistan. Now, this two-way movement, Pakistan to Afghanistan, Afghanistan to Pakistan, can be contained if Pakistan, Afghanistan, and United States cooperate on border monitoring. Unfortunately, there is very poor cooperation between these three countries on border monitoring. Pakistan is building border fence on Pakistan-Afghan border. Because of time constraint, I will not get into its detail. But Afghanistan is not favorably disposed towards this project, fencing Pakistan-Afghan border. And therefore, sometimes you have strain on this issue. And so far as how to distinguish Afghan fighter from Pakistani or Pashtun or Afghans living in Pakistan, let me narrate an incident that will explain the dilemma that I'm trying to emphasize here. In the first quarter of 2017, the Punjab government began to check the documents of Pashtuns living in the province of Punjab, especially in the urban centers, especially in Lahore and other areas. Police went to their business centers, their houses to check their document. They wanted to know if they have any links with the militant groups. And secondly, whether they were Pakistani national or Afghan national. There was so much hue and cry within 2 weeks of starting of this campaign, and also protest from Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and one of the leaders of the political party from Khyber Pakhtunkhwa threatened that if this ethnic profiling continues, term was ethnic profiling continues, we will not let any person from Punjab to live in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. The campaign had to be abandoned. That highlights the kind of dilemmas that you face. In addition to this, let me very briefly mention 5 issues that need attention in the future. And I will not get into detail. We can talk about that in question-answer session. Number 1, U.S. criticism of Pakistan-China economic corridor. It was discussed in the earlier session. Second, impact of U.S. diplomatic wrangling with Iran on Pakistan's relations with Iran. Pakistan wants to expand economic ties with Iran. Pakistan is getting electricity from Iran. Pakistan will get more electricity from Iran. And then there is a pipeline issue, gas pipeline issue. Third, U.S. insensitivity to Pakistan's problems with India. And the latest example would be that if you look at the joint statement issued after what they call 2+2 meeting between between India and the US on 6th September 2018, there are 4 or 5 lines on Pakistan in that joint statement, and all of that is negative to Pakistan. Fourth, US public denunciation of Pakistan encourages Afghanistan to adopt a strident approach or strident disposition towards Pakistan. Fifth, discontinuation of aspects of relations between Pakistan and US. For example, some financial arrangements have been disrupted, have been suspended. I think Pakistan and US need to sit together to discuss in a broader context of socio-economic development how US could contribute, and also especially the suspension of military training program. In fact, military training program remained suspended from 1990 to 2001. And journal conclusion about those 11 years experience is that it was not helpful decision to discontinue military training. It adversely affected the relationship between Pakistan military and the US military. And I'm sure if this ban continues, the same conclusion would be after year or so. Now let me conclude by saying that what Pakistan and the US need is a shared accommodating approach to address the issues in a comprehensive manner. And my emphasis is on the word comprehensive manner rather than a selective approach which the US adopts when it comes to Afghanistan problem. A workable strategy cannot be formulated on the considerations articulated separately by Washington or Islamabad. They need to work together to evolve strategies for countering terrorism and addressing the issues of socio-economic development in Pakistan. And that needs to accommodate the security concerns of both sides. Pakistan's new government is now working with the military to address foreign policy and terrorism issues, and they are very keen to improve the relationship with the United States. But again, this will require a comprehensive view of the issues that afflict Pakistan-US relations and also security concerns. Therefore, Pakistan and US both want peace, stability, security, and economic development in the region. The need is how they can work together and understand Pakistan's security concerns, which not simply limit to Afghanistan. Pakistan's security concerns go beyond that, and Pakistani perception is that US policy in the region has negative implications for its relations with 2 neighbors with whom Pakistan still has good relations. That is China and Iran. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Dr. Rizvi. Now we'll go to Ambassador Bashir.
Laura?
That's okay.
Okay.
Give you the bookend.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Michael. It's good to be here at the Wilson. Thank you, Indus, for organizing this. I think the biggest advantage of a symposium like this is that it at least proves to me that in this city, there are some people who believe that this is a relationship that can be reworked or repaired. Unfortunately, from the Islamabad perspective, it appears to us that Pakistan has not even negative relevance anymore for the US. The Afghanistan-South Asia strategy is now plus 1 year old. And I believe also from this city's perspective, there are many who would agree that it's not worked. So, I mean, the familiar refrain is about Pakistan's negative relevance. That is unfortunately the view of official United States, which is circumscribed by what President Trump sort of announced in August. And official United States has, it appears to us, lost the ability to see Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the world a little bit differently. So therefore, the importance of this symposium, and especially note the point, pathway to change. And of course, I mean, from the speeches that we have heard this morning, they have set the baseline. That's where it is. It's almost broken up. Is there a possibility to sort of rework? Is the effort really worth it? Or have we drifted so far apart that our worldviews do not converge anymore? Let me give you some given the limited time that we have. First of all, I think in Pakistan, of course, we are aware of the societal change, the pace in which our society has changed. The PTI's victory, for instance, is one solid indicator of the way the Pakistani society has gone forward. I don't know, forward or backward, but it has changed, right? It's the technology, it's demography, it's the generational change. And this is not just typical Pakistan. This is happening in this country as it's happening in Europe and elsewhere. I think some of us who are so used to by education or habit or experience of the past 100 years so, we are just unable to look at the world except through geopolitical prisms. And I think that is an area which we need to sort of, not only part of US-Pakistan, but US and the world, and China, US, and Russia, US, we need to sort of really have some open conversations in the academia about the nature, the state of the world. Let me just sort of, I don't want to sort of delve too much into the philosophical questions, but what sort of stands out in my mind is President Trump's address to the UN General Assembly recently, where he spoke about globalism and the importance of patriotism. He spoke about freedom, about sovereignty, about independence. I think he made some very honest, sincere, very valuable points. Actually, it was a pitch that he was making to recast, basically, the way we have been working for the last 70 years or so in terms of multilateral cooperation. In fact, what he was saying was that let's go back to the Charter. He didn't say that, but this is what he means. Self-determination, sovereignty, equal rights. These are the cardinal principles of the Charter of the United Nations. And I think Pakistan should do well to heed by President Trump's advice and sort of temper our perennial idealism with the realities of our own society and the world today. So this is where we need to begin. First of all, if we need to have conversations, we need to have conversations about the state of the world, right? Now, this is, as I said, a philosophical point, but I think if you want to sort of really and we'll be very interested in that, and I hope official Washington is in a mood for that, to be able to think beyond the scope of the Afghanistan South Asia strategy or the Indo-Pacific strategy or whatever nuclear posture reviews. I mean, we heard David Sidney just now mention about the importance of discussions or conversations on the nuclear issue. Of course, we'll be very interested. But we are also seeing what is happening, where the US is going on all these fronts. So I think Shuja Nawaz talks of an unequal relationship. But of course, although it may be an unequal relationship, the fact is that we are prepared and we are cognizant of what's happening, what are the dynamics that are at play. So my general point is that we need to have conversations, Pakistan and the US, from our limited South Asia, Middle East, Central Asia perspective with the United States, the way we want to be, to restore a sense of common purpose. I think that's where the problem is. We have lost that sense of common purpose. There has never been a bilateral relationship between Pakistan and the US. It was always about something else, whether it was the Soviets in Afghanistan or the free world. So where was the bilateral? And then it was terrorism. But terrorism is a passé point. I mean, it's a point that's shifted from the Washington vocabulary. It is now great power competition, right? So it's about China, it's about Russia. And that is where I think one major exception will have to be made. Pakistan and US probably will have to omit China from the discourse, right? So, now a little bit about Pakistan. I think what we all aspire in Pakistan, whether it is the government, the military, the common man, we are cognizant of our geographical advantages and disadvantages. So our aspiration is to transform our vulnerability into a strength, that is the geopolitical or geostrategic vulnerability. Of course, that also means that we prioritize development, which requires peace within and peace around us. And I believe it's here that our priorities coincide with the US. So, as I said, one major exception that has to be, or either we have to talk about it, is China. Given the intensity of US-China, rhetoric and trade war, and where we are seeing the literature coming out of think tanks in this city and this country, we need to be very clear whether that is something that is going to affect Afghanistan, Pakistan, or Pakistan, Afghanistan is going to be enveloped into Indo-Pacific strategy. My first recommendation, and as you said, you called for recommendations, so, in terms of a symposium, is that Pakistan, Afghanistan should not be enveloped in the US Indo-Pacific strategy. I think that is something that is very important. Of course, there are good reasons for that. I don't need to really dwell on that. China has always advised Pakistan to have good relations, to work our relations with the US. China has never asked us for a naval or a military base. So I think all these concerns and apprehensions among the geostrategists in this city are a little bit misplaced. As far as Afghanistan, we heard a lot about it this morning. Pakistan wants the US to succeed in Afghanistan. It has to be a victory for peace in Afghanistan. It's not about surrender, defeat, or victory for the Taliban. A victory for peace, that needs to be the paradigm. We view in Pakistan, US presence as a factor of stability in Afghanistan. If US were to withdraw, it will create a huge mess for the region and, of course, for Afghanistan. It is increasingly clear that there is no military solution to the Afghan civil war. And again, Afghanistan, I think official Washington needs to recognize the phase of terrorism, counterterrorism, and counterinsurgency is probably over. We have differences. Afghanistan is in a state of civil war. It has been for 40 years. Now it's becoming more evident. So I think that needs to. So my second recommendation is let's us cooperate regarding peace and stability in Afghanistan, and this should become a primary driver for cooperation between the US and Pakistan. My third recommendation, Michael, given your directives, is that US-Pakistan and US-India relations should not intersect. I think, even on our side, there are apprehensions of where the US is going with India. All we want to see is that India prospers, US prospers. We don't want to see Indians using US technology and weaponry against Pakistan. So my other recommendation is that US should view the economic potential of our region and recognize the importance of north, south, and east-west connectivity. Now, this is something which is not new. It has been there. It has been part of US policy to promote such cooperation, Central Asia, South Asia. And I think here the connectivity point that was being made by Shuja and my friends here, one can call it CPEC, you can call it connectivity plus, you can call it CPEC plus vision. But this is where really the importance of Pakistan comes in, to serve as the node or for overland transportation and energy transactions between Central Asia, Greater Eurasia region, and CPEC doesn't really connect to China. It connects basically to Afghanistan. And I think we need to sort of relook and update ourselves on the way the picture is developing. Not to overshoot my last recommendation, or second last, I think so far, in terms of the bilateral, at least we've had some conversations between our foreign ministers. That's a good channel of communication. I think on all these grievances that the US has, we should set up a standing military to military and intel mechanism. Because, all these nitty-gritty points about the Haqqanis and the sanctuaries, we want this stability and peace in Afghanistan. We are working very hard with the government in Kabul. It's going very well. So I think to address and for coordination, cooperation, we need to have such sort of a mechanism. And my final point is, please don't rush to judgment. I believe that the worth of our work together over decades that helped shape the world, and the sacrifices of all the brave hearts on either side for peace and freedom, human rights, dignity, democracy, and the rule of law, deserve to be honored by deepening trust and cooperation between our peoples. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Bashir. We're going to get into a discussion soon, but first, our fourth panelist, Laurel Miller, will weigh in.
Thank you. I know you want us to focus on policy recommendations, but I'm going to start with some analytic observations and predictions regarding the state of the relationship and where I think it's going. And I think you're right that we've all heard many of the marriage analogies. I think in preparing for this, the analogy that came to my mind was one of, a car stuck in a rut and the wheels turning, it just dig it deeper and deeper into the rut. And unfortunately, we're, steering in opposite directions as we're trying to get out and just getting deeper and deeper into the rut instead. The basis of from a U.S. policy perspective, the basis of the recent policy directions in Washington, in my view, is less analysis of how to achieve American objectives in modifying Pakistani policy, and rather a basis in anger and frustration towards Pakistan. And it's frustration that is not new to the Trump administration. It's frustration that built up during the course of the Obama administration as well. And many of the individuals who have been, particularly in the early stages of the Trump administration, shaping policy towards Pakistan are within the bureaucracies, individuals who were involved in the policy during the Obama administration as well. So I think it's not accurate to pin the changes in U.S. policy and the stepped-up pressure on President Trump's views in particular. I think this is, as I said, something that has been building up over time. In my view, that anger and frustration is not going to abate until the differences between the U.S. and Pakistan over Afghanistan either go away because, or predominantly go away because there has been a negotiated settlement of the conflict in Afghanistan, or alternatively, because the U.S. decides to withdraw, regardless of achieving a negotiated settlement, and decides it doesn't care too much any longer what happens in Afghanistan. I'm not predicting that's likely to happen, but I also don't find it to be an impossible scenario. Again, to be clear, I'm not making policy recommendations here. These are my observations on the state of the relationship and where U.S. policy thinking is in official Washington. Now, the focus on Afghanistan and the relationship from the U.S. policy perspective is not because other interests are entirely unrecognized, but it is because looking at the relationship through the lens of Afghanistan puts everything else into very soft focus. I slightly disagree with David's characterization of how the Obama administration looked at the nuclear issues, though we didn't overlap. He was during the first term and I served during the second term, so perhaps there's some distinction there. I don't think, in my experience, I don't think there was a prioritization of the nuclear issues over the counterterrorism issues. I do think that there's a distinction between the Obama administration and the Trump administration in terms of the calculation as to how to achieve U.S. counterterrorism objectives with respect to Pakistan and how to achieve U.S. objectives in Afghanistan. So, as I said, there was certainly a very high degree of frustration towards Pakistan during the Obama administration, particularly the later stages of the Obama administration, but there was still an analysis that there were steps that had to be taken with Pakistan in order to achieve cooperation on these issues that held the U.S. back from taking the most extreme measures you might imagine, or even some of the moderately more extreme measures that have been taken during the Trump administration to apply pressure on Pakistan. It's, I can appreciate why there is frustration on the Pakistani side as to the U.S. Overwhelming focus on Afghanistan in the relationship. And it's not terribly surprising given that Pakistani policy towards Afghanistan has been quite consistent over a very long period of time, and over a period of time that precedes the U.S. Intervention in Afghanistan after 9/11. It's U.S. policy that has changed over time. I mean, not to say there are no changes in Pakistani policy towards Afghanistan, but there has been remarkable consistency in the messages that Pakistani officials have conveyed to the U.S. regarding Pakistani interests in Afghanistan and the way that Pakistan evaluates the problems in Afghanistan. But as I said, U.S. policy has changed quite a bit over this time period, and the U.S. has tried to cajole and, in recent stages, compel Pakistan to come on board with the U.S. analysis of the problem in Afghanistan, U.S. policy in Afghanistan, and to buy into a strategy in Afghanistan that Pakistan simply doesn't agree with and doesn't expect to succeed. What the U.S. hasn't found a way to do is to build Pakistani confidence either in the potential for success of the U.S. strategy or to offer some truly compelling reason for Afghanistan to come on board with the U.S. strategy. Despite this very large obstacle that Afghanistan poses in the U.S.-Pakistan relationship, and here's where I get into my analytical predictions of the future, the U.S. is not going to be in Afghanistan forever. Either there will be the negotiation of a peace agreement or there won't be a negotiation of a peace agreement. But regardless, I am very hard-pressed to see the United States forever engaged in Afghanistan in the way that it is today. On the other hand, Pakistan is going to be next door to Afghanistan forever. And that means that Pakistan has, first of all, an importance in terms of any kind of reasonably stable resolution you might see to the situation in Afghanistan. But it also means that any enduring U.S. interests in the region, for instance, in either being able to counter terrorist groups or at least keep an eye on terrorist groups, are going to require U.S. engagement with Pakistan beyond the term of the U.S. involvement in Afghanistan. The bottom line of U.S. interests in the region is that there should not be the export of insecurity from the region to the U.S. homeland or to core U.S. interests. And as I said, regardless of the current U.S. frustration and anger at Pakistan with respect to the situation in Afghanistan, and regardless of who's right and wrong, good and bad in this scenario, I do think that, in my view, it is very likely that U.S. prioritizing of Afghanistan over Pakistan is not going to endure over the long term. As I said, I'm not making a policy recommendation here, but this is my analytical judgment. I think there are two open questions of particular importance for the future of U.S.-Pakistan relations, and I think Ambassador Bashir referred to both of these in a somewhat different way. The first is the U.S. focus on building up a relationship with India is likely to endure and is likely to, if not be accelerated, at least be sustained, I think, beyond the current administration in Washington. There's a choice for Pakistan to make in light of that. The choice is Pakistan going to see that as a zero-sum in terms of the U.S.-Pakistan relationship and the regional dynamics, or not? I do think it is more up to Pakistan than it is up to the U.S. to make the choice as to whether or not to see the U.S.-India relationship and the U.S.-Pakistan relationship as two separate dynamics that need to evolve on their own terms. And there are times, certainly, when the U.S. gets drawn into this sort of zero-sum thinking about the two relationships. But fundamentally, I believe that the U.S. draws a distinction between the two relationships and is capable of pursuing the two relationships and developing those relationships more on their own terms. The more that Pakistan sees this as a zero-sum equation and behaves in that way, the harder it's going to be for the U.S.-Pakistan relationship to truly develop on its own terms. The second open question for the future, and again, I think your comments touched on this, does relate to China. And I think there's a U.S. choice to be made here. And the question for the U.S., and I don't think it's one that's been given a tremendous amount of thought in Washington, either in official or unofficial Washington, is will the U.S. or should the U.S. care about stemming China's role in South Asia? Is it enough for the U.S. to grow the U.S.-India relationship as a counterweight to China, or are there other moves that the U.S. should make with respect to China in South Asia? In recent years, the U.S. has actually actively encouraged Chinese engagement in Afghanistan, not military engagement, but civilian engagement in Afghanistan, and has tried actively to draw China into being more involved in Afghanistan as on the theory that China can be a net contributor to stability in the country and can be a financial contributor to the country. And I would say that the U.S. has pretty much ceded the ground to China in Pakistan, and increasingly so. Without, I unfortunately missed Henry Encher's comments this morning, but there's occasionally the sort of jab at the China-Pakistan relationship and CPEC, but I don't see that as a very significant dimension of U.S. policy. The U.S. has pretty much ceded Pakistan to China. But it is possible that the U.S. will see that differently in the future based on the U.S.-China competition and the broader geopolitical dynamics. And as I said, I really don't think much thought has been put into this in Washington, in any of the spheres within Washington, but it wouldn't surprise me if more thought has been put into this in the future. And whatever those thoughts turn out to be will potentially have very significant effects on the future of the U.S.-Pakistan relationship. Just to close on a few remarks about some of the previous speakers' comments on policy recommendations in particular, I think Shuja had some very useful suggestions for in particular for some of the unilateral steps that Pakistan could take to help improve the current situation in the U.S.-Pakistan relationship. And I would also add to that an emphasis, and it's been touched on by others, on helping to move beyond the obstacle of Afghanistan, the obstacle that Afghanistan poses in the U.S.-Pakistan relationship. Even without doing all that the U.S. has asked of Pakistan over time, there is a lot that Pakistan can do in really going all in supporting a negotiation of a peace settlement in Afghanistan and of helping the United States to see a way towards a negotiated resolution of the conflict in Afghanistan. I think there's some will there on the Pakistani side. And again, I think there are also limitations on how far Pakistan will go in meeting U.S. requests and demands in this regard. But there is certainly more that Pakistan can do to help the U.S. move that initiative forward, an initiative that is now a higher priority in Washington. I would close on just one final comment on Shuja's remarks about history and how history factors into Pakistani thinking and U.S. thinking about this relationship, what the problems actually are, who bears the blame for those problems, and what the way forward needs to be. And my remark would just be that it's by no means unique to policy towards Pakistan for the United States in its policy making to be remarkably unburdened by history. That is just the American tendency in policy making. And again, one can appreciate why that might frustrate Pakistanis, but that is I think, unchangeable phenomenon, and one to simply accept that there are differences.
Well, thank you, Laurel, for those invaluable comments. Thank you to all of the panel. We talk about an unequal relationship. We now have an unequal relationship in the panel in favor of the Pakistanis. And on a serious note,
Okay.
David Sedney.
I'll hold my hand.
Yes, David Sedney had a family emergency and had to leave early, but Laurel, I think, could hold her own. We talk about frostiness in the U.S.-Pakistan relationship. Apologies that the room is a bit cold right now. We've been working on that. That will be addressed. Let me pose I'll put two questions on the table for our panel, and then we'll go to the group. And I'd categorize them as one question involving process, one involving personalities. Go to the process question first. I've heard a number of issues thrown out there that could constitute potential areas of cooperation beyond the Afghanistan story. We've heard nuclear issues, we've heard terrorism, counterterrorism, we've heard socioeconomic issues, we've heard about, human rights issues, things like that. I think we can all agree that those could potentially be areas of convergence, but there's a lot of baggage and a lot of trouble in those categories right there. So the question is, is it realistic to think that now and in the coming year and the coming years, how do you think about trying to muster the goodwill and trust that would enable the two sides to have conversations about those issues? So this is where I get into the process issue. How do you convene dialogue? And I think you had mentioned, Ambassador Bashir, you had put out a very specific idea about structurally how to have these conversations. But how do you go about thinking about having those types of conversations now when the relationship is troubled? And the question about personalities. Donald Trump, Imran Khan. I guess pose a Trump-related question to Laurel and an Imran Khan-related question to our Pakistanis that you could each speak on whichever you'd like. I think you had said, Laurel, rightfully so, that the most recent troubling trajectory in this relationship, really, we saw that in the last few years of the Obama years. But that said, do you think there's potential for the relationship to improve under President Trump, or is it completely a lost cause? And then the question with Imran Khan, I think when the issue comes up about what we can expect from this new government when it comes to the United States and relations with the United States, now, the answer for many observers and analysts in the U.S. is that, well, that doesn't really matter because it's the military in Pakistan that calls the shots, so to speak, on the relationship with the United States. So I'd be curious just to get your perspective on that view, and then more broadly, your thinking on what we could expect when it comes to Imran Khan and what his arrival on the scene and power could mean for U.S.-Pakistan relations. So first, the question about process. How do you actually think about having these conversations that are difficult to have? And then secondly, the question is about the key personalities. Anyone want to start?
What I was trying to say was that we need to have some sort of conversations, not just Pakistan, US, but about the world, how we see each other, how we see the world, how we see the region, what are our interests. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, as I said also, that it appears to me that official Washington is probably not interested in that. It's the sort of things that you mentioned, whether it's nuclear or human rights or, what happens to the journalists in Pakistan or, stuff like that. Of course, all of that again is a part of the general pattern. We need to sort of really see where we are. I think, in my personal view, what is a bit lost, and I think we all are in that sort of situation, we are not being able to see the new realities. You know, the new realities, I mean, the change in our societies, respective societies, and the change worldwide. I think we are in a different age. And some of the stuff that we've talked about, you know, whether it is nuclear or human rights or, you know, freedoms, sovereignty, independence, patriotism, globalism, what to do with. There were years where we had very robust conversations, you know, as partners, as allies. But now, if you cannot do it at the official level, because it's very narrowly circumscribed, the agenda, then forums like this, where we are able to sort of, you know, at least have some ongoing, and I know there is a diversity of views, both in Pakistan and in the US on a lot of these things. So therefore I said that it's very, very good to have this opportunity, you know, to sort of think out of the box. We all know what the problems are, but how to sort of go about if Pakistan is relevant to the US. If it is negative relevance, how do we make it into a positive relevance? If we agree to make it into a positive relevance, then we need to have conversations. And these conversations have to be, first of all, on the assessment. Assessment about, okay, Afghanistan, Pakistan, the US, the world, where we want to be to be the end stage, you know, so to say, the buzzwords, end stage in Afghanistan, end stage, you know, in our region, Pakistan-India relations, whatever, and then get to real cooperation. So I think conceptually that is the way I would look at it. As far as the personalities, I think, I mean, this is a very personal view, but I think President Trump is an exceptional president. His instincts are all correct. He didn't want to stay in Afghanistan for too long. He knows what is good for the US, and what is good for the US matters. I think Imran Khan is also, he's been compared in some comedy shows, you know, with President Trump, but the point is that he began, even before he became the Prime Minister, he listed US as one of, I mean, improving US-Pakistan relations as a priority. He also talked about open and tranquil borders with Afghanistan. He also spoke about normalizing relations with India and trade with India. All of this was volunteered. Of course, that is where the Pakistani government and the Pakistani military wants to go. And I think this whole debate, which has become so you know, this is it's stereotyped about Pakistan, the civil-military divide, I think it's a false one. I think it's wrong to think that the military is on a different music sheet than the civil government. It's self-defeating. And if the military has a particular point of view, then what prevents the Pentagon or the CIA to talk to our intelligence and our military? Have robust conversations going on that end of the spectrum, if there are doubts, you know, about that. So I think it is doable. The problem, and I don't want to be judgmental about it, I don't see official Washington being open enough to have these conversations. We used to have that. When I was in my job, we had such conversations with late Ambassador Holbrooke and Mark Grossman. You know, very, very deep conversations about ourselves and where we wanted to go. Unfortunately, we don't see interlocutors like that anymore. Thank you.
Well, whether you are talking about, you know, nuclear issue, terrorism, or socio-economic development, what you need is a kind of a sustained and continuous dialogue between the two countries. And this sustained and continuous dialogue can be meaningful if the two sides, especially from the highest level, avoid public denunciation of each other. Because of late, especially in the last 2 years, we have seen a lot of public denunciation of Pakistan, and that limits the options that Pakistani government can exercise. For example, all the time statements coming about, let's say, Afghan Taliban, Haqqani group, or Lashkar-e-Tayyaba or Jamaat-ud-Dawa, the more these statements come from United States and India, the more difficult it becomes for Pakistani government within the context its domestic politics to address these kind of issues. So public denunciations have to be avoided. So far as personalities are concerned, yes, personalities are important, at least to the extent of slowing down or expediting a process or issuing a statement that can cause a lot of trouble in bilateral relations. However, ultimately, it is the institutions that matter. Ultimately, it is the institution and their institutional memory that influences the kind of decision a country has made. In case of Pakistan, we always hear outside of Pakistan, military going in one direction, civilian leadership going in the other direction. Not getting into the detail of problems of civil-military relations in Pakistan, at least at the moment, in the present context, the two are working together on foreign policy, security, and terrorism issue. This is the kind of an opportunity which need to be explored, and the conventional argument with whom we talk in Pakistan, although for last 70 years, America and Pakistan have been talking. Talk to the same people with whom United States was talking in the past. Thank you.
Laurel?
To take your second question first, I mean, on President Trump, I think all I'll say is he's obviously the ultimate transactionalist. So I wouldn't make any particular prediction as to what that could mean in terms of relations with Pakistan. I think it suggests that unless he sees some benefit for the U.S. in turning around the relationship, then he's not likely to put much effort into pursuing that or to direct others to do so. But if there was some opportunity that arose, I wouldn't predict that he would be weighed down by the baggage of the past, and that he would take opportunities if they did arise. I think that leads to the answer to your first question. Unfortunately, I think currently the relevance of Pakistan for the U.S. is all the negative relevance. There isn't currently a positive relevance for the United States from a U.S. perspective. And you can't just manufacture the positivity, the trust, and the goodwill because you want to have positivity, trust, and goodwill. You can only build that up through actual actions and over a period of time. There has to be a basis for that trust and goodwill. It's not something you can just can be sprung into existence. There are fundamental divergences between the U.S. and Pakistan currently from a U.S. perspective. The most important of those from a U.S. perspective is Pakistan's continued use of militant proxies. That is something that's a kind of negative behavior that, let's be honest, the United States is capable of turning a blind eye to. It happens in other parts of the world that the U.S. turns a blind eye to some pretty negative behavior. But it does that when there's some very strong countervailing interest or benefit for the United States, some very strong countervailing economic interest or energy resources interest. You can look at a variety of examples from elsewhere in the world, and at the moment, there isn't such a strong countervailing interest to motivate the United States to turn a blind eye to what are, in fact, serious issues, and serious issues for Pakistan domestically as well, of course. It's not just an external problem. I mean, if there is to be some positive relevance for the United States in the relationship, then you have to ask the question, Again, from a U.S. perspective, what does Pakistan have to offer that the United States wants? And the answer to that is that Pakistan, in principle, has to offer assistance in counterterrorism, has to offer being a net contributor to regional stability. There has been in the past some important cooperation between the U.S. and Pakistan on counterterrorism, particularly against al-Qaeda. And that is one reason to think that there's a possibility of that in the future. But of course, that has been when there have been targets of that cooperation that have been of common interest to the U.S. and Pakistan. But if Pakistan wants to pursue creating that positive relevance, it's in that space, in the security space, being, as I said, a net contributor to regional stability, that I would see the most opportunity.
Well, thank you. Well, let's go to you. I would, as we noted earlier, please make sure that you pose a question, keep it short, and if you could give your name and affiliation, and please wait until you've been recognized and have a microphone in front of you before you pose your question. If it's okay with the panel, we'll take a few questions, 2 or 3 together in the interest of time. So start on this side of the room. I think, Alan had his hand up. Gentleman right there, you put your hand up higher. There we go. We'll start there, and then we'll come.
Thank you. I'm Alan Cronstadt, Congressional Research Service. I arrived in Washington to cover the region in 2002. The film Groundhog Day was about 9 years old at that point. And even before I arrived in Washington, I was very aware of the cyclical nature of PAC-U.S. relations over the decades, and that movie title being used as applying to it. So it seems we do have something genuinely new now in that the United States is engaging a new party that's not the PPP or PMLN, and is not engaging a formal head of government that is a general, an active duty general. So given that, one question I wanted to ask the panel, if anyone wanted to volunteer an area or initiative that could be substantively new and introduce something new to the relationship. Second to that, I'd like to propose something and hear if it might have any legs or if it's ill-advised or naive. But Khan and the PTI ran on an almost singular anti-corruption platform. Certainly, I've talked to a lot of Pakistanis who would like to see more transparency and less corruption in their country. And even with regard to CPEC, there are complaints from Pakistan about Chinese opaqueness in that engagement. The United States, meanwhile, has every reason to prefer a more transparent and anti-corrupt Pakistani system. So perhaps is there an area for initiative where both governments clearly agree and the PTI has run on an anti-corruption transparency package if the United States and Pakistan could pursue any meaningful initiative in that region?
Okay, thanks. You could hand the mic to Abdullah. We're going to go all the way to the gentleman right in the back, all the way over there. Yeah, all the way in the back.
My name is Nasir Naveed. I am associated with Indus. Regarding Pakistan-US relationship, there are some realities that we need to understand. Pakistan in this relationship is a weaker party, and usually in international politics, it doesn't matter either you're right or wrong. The point is how much power or leverage you have. US obviously has more power and leverage on Pakistan. Like you need to have IMF loans, you will have to knock the door of US. US can deny that. You need to have some aid from Europeans, US can have like a role in that. So there are many avenues which you need, and on every avenue you will see a US role in that. And in regarding Pakistan, the US need only one favor, that it wants Pakistan to help it in dealing with Afghan Taliban or Haqqanis or even Lashkar-e-Taiba. Pakistan is saying that it's a denunciation of Pakistan, but the realities are Hafiz Saeed or his affiliates, they are still like openly walking around in country and they are holding rallies, and it's not only the American media, it's Pakistani media that is reporting it. So like there are so many negative things that are on the Pakistan's end, and by doing some work on those things, Pakistan give a good impression to the U.S. Like we are doing some good things. Pakistan conducted a series of military operations against militants in North Waziristan and some other areas, but still U.S. concerns are that these were selective operations against militants, and Haqqani network, although they have been dislodged from one agency, they have been placed in another agency. So there are some concerns how Pakistan would address these to build some confidence building measures between Pakistan and the US.
Getting right to the heart of the matter. Let's take one more question from someone who has not asked one yet. So yes, the woman sitting right there toward the middle of the room. Yep. Yeah, right in the middle. Yes, you. Sorry.
My question is to the panelist on the left. You talked about countering terrorism and extremism, especially in the northern parts of Pakistan. And I was wondering if you can talk about the Pakistani and Saudi relationship and why the Pakistani government still is catering to that relationship if they have been proven to actually support a lot of the extremism and Wahhabism in the northern parts of Pakistan. Having the recent general just went to Saudi Arabia as well. So if you can just talk a little bit about that. And I think someone else talked about that here, but I wanted to know about Imran Khan and his stance on actually negotiating with the Taliban and how that, since it's completely countering to what the U.S. position is, how that plays into the Pakistan and U.S. relationship as well. Thank you.
I think that should be a good start. So we had the first question was about the issue of corruption. Where the two sides could look at that. So we had a question about the Haqqani network and that whole thing, and then a question about Imran Khan and his position on negotiations, militants. So
I'll take the
Sure.
anti-corruption one. On that, I would say, the U.S. would certainly welcome it if Pakistan made some headway on countering corruption within Pakistan. But I don't honestly see a lot of room for U.S.-Pakistan cooperation on that. The track record of U.S. efforts, technical assistance, and political support for countering corruption around the world is quite poor, and not particularly because of any flaws in how the U.S. has proceeded with that, but just because of the nature of corruption and the nature of the methods for addressing it and for reducing it have just far, far more to do with internal dynamics in whatever country you're talking about than anything that can be affected from the outside. So I would see U.S. contributions or potential contributions to anti-corruption measures as being entirely marginal and therefore not much basis for joint action. I would just say on the question about the Pakistan-Saudi relationship, I'm interested in the other panelists' views on this, but my take on that is that relationship is going to continue because it's valuable to Pakistan, and it's a straightforward interests calculation, and I think Pakistan on the whole has been rather savvy in how it has balanced its relationships with Saudi Arabia and with Iran, and has been, from a Pakistani perspective, wise to avoid getting drawn into any moves that would make it look like it was taking sides in that contest.
The first question talked about the U.S. engaging the new party in Pakistan and new areas of cooperation with the new government in Pakistan. I think socio-economic development, especially economy, are the areas where Pakistan would seek American cooperation, because Pakistan's economy is in trouble. It faces a lot of problems, and for that, international cooperation, especially American cooperation, is needed at a time when Pakistan is knocking at the door of the IMF. And so far as anti-corruption efforts are concerned, it's basically depend on the policies of the government, its machinery, its system, if that can effectively address this problem in a transparent manner and without spending a lot of time that raises doubts about the whole exercise. So it depends on the performance of the new government in Pakistan. And in the case of the second question, where the issue of power and leverage was mentioned, yes, US has leverage over Pakistan for understandable reason. And nobody is talking of a relationship of equality. You can't think of equality between Pakistan and United States. You are talking of a developing countries interacting with a superpower. So there has to be difference in the level. However, our experience in international politics shows that even weaker states, even smaller states, can use diplomacy, can use their geographic location, can use their own assets to overcome the leverage which is to their disadvantage. And Pakistan can do that. Whether it will actually succeed in doing that is an open question. We are still not sure whether Pakistan will succeed in that. The third question related to Pakistan-Saudi relations, it's a kind of a difficult relationship in the sense that Pakistan values this relationship, and Pakistan's military cooperation with Saudi Arabia goes to the late 60s when first arrangement was signed. On the other hand, Pakistan is perturbed by what was mentioned here, support to religious extremist groups in Pakistan, especially in the past. However, this relationship that is support to different religious groups, Salafi groups or Wahhabi groups, that is being now regulated by the government of Pakistan. If there is any economic assistance now coming to these religious groups, it's through approval which they get from Pakistan's Foreign Office. So far as Saudi is concerned, Pakistan has maintained that it will not get involved in any Saudi power game in the Middle East, which means a number of things, including Iran. Pakistan will stay away. And if Pakistani forces are present there for training purposes or for other purposes, they are not going to perform any kind of assignment beyond the territorial boundaries of Saudi Arabia. That has been Pakistan's policies since '65. So this relationship will continue with Saudi Arabia, but there will be problems from time to time because of Saudi's religious agenda in the Muslim countries.
Yeah, if you have just 2 minutes.
Sure, yeah.
Okay. Well, on Saudi Arabia relationship, I'd just like to add that, of course, Saudi Arabia is a very important country, not only for Pakistan, but for many others, including in the West. As far as the question of making good impression on the U.S., I think one of our friends mentioned, and also regarding negotiations or reaching out or helping out with a political settlement. I think, of course, good impression will stay here with the U.S. if we are able to really sort of be of some help in getting to a political solution. I think much of the take that is there as of now is about pressure on Pakistan, on sort of whipping the Haqqanis or the TTA. I think maybe in reality things have moved, and I think Laurel Miller rightly sort of mentioned at some point that there has been an evolution in the U.S. thinking and U.S. position, the willingness to talk to the Taliban, the willingness to talk of U.S. presence, the willingness to talk about, the constitutional dispensation, putting together a political settlement. I think on all of this, there is tremendous convergence. I think this thing needs to be taken forward. Personally, I think there is ongoing a four-way convergence in the making. So all is not lost, all is not very negative. I think our real interests, whether it is the US, Pakistan, the National Unity Government in Kabul, and even the TTA, they have started to converge. So I think there is a very good opportunity now to maybe spring to put it all together. Of course, we have this parliamentary election and then we go to the presidential election. But okay, in this period of time, we need to really put an honest effort, because I believe that the end stage that all the four want somehow converge. US, of course, does not want to see Afghanistan again fall, into this terrorism trap. There is a complete convergence on the elimination of ISIS between Pakistan, US, NUG, and of course the Taliban. There have been lately signals from the Taliban, and of course we don't speak for them, but I mean we all follow it. There have been conversations between Zalmay Khalilzad and previously between Alice Wells in Doha. So I think I see there is a lot of opportunity there. So I think in terms of making a good impression or proving Pakistan's credentials, not proving Pakistan's credentials just to win favors from the US. It is in Pakistan's national interest to see that we work together with the US for stability and peace in Afghanistan. As far as the opaqueness about the Chinese loans and the IMF, I think this was totally unwarranted. The approach that the American officials took on the IMF, they used that as an opportunity, to bring in this Indo-Pacific thing about China. The Chinese repayments are not due at least for another 3 years. And of course, the IMF and these other people, and of course, the Americans are welcome to sort of look at these accounts and see where it stands. I have served as ambassador to China, and I know I'm familiar not with these loans, but the previous loans, that these were all like 20 years repayment period and 2.5% like that. So I think let's not use CPEC and China. And as I said, my first recommendation was not to get this whole thing enveloped in the global interplay between great powers. We are a small country. We can no longer afford. We have in the past played the proxy for our friends. We are no longer in a position to do that. It has cost us too much. But there are positives, I think, which we need to sort of underscore, and especially among the think tanks, in the media. There are some good write-ups that have come lately. We want the US to succeed. We want the Afghan people to succeed, and we want the region to be peaceful. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Well, I want to take 3 more questions and have 3 quick responses before we break. And I'd like to take questions from those that have not asked a question in previous panels. So we'll start in the back, the woman over there on that side, and then we'll come to the gentleman here, and then let's see, we'll come over here. And I apologize, we can't take all the questions. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Shazia Khan. I'm the CEO of a company called Eco Energy. We're the largest off-grid distributed solar company operating in Pakistan, providing energy to off-grid areas that are off of the national grid. As a U.S. company doing business in Pakistan, and we've been operating there for over the last 8 years, I would push back a little bit on you, Laurel, and say that there is another sort of countervailing interest for the U.S. Beyond just what sort of security measures Pakistan can offer. I would say that Pakistan is, by Morgan Stanley's measure, has gone from a frontier market to an emerging economy. There's 200 million people there, and they need goods and services. If U.S. companies want access to these markets, it's difficult to do business there when the U.S. and Pakistan have chilly relationships. So if there's, do you have a recommendation or a suggestion for companies that are maybe not yet at a multinational level, but that do have economic interests in Pakistan? How can they get the support that they need from the U.S. government to understand that there are other opportunities in Pakistan and that this is a missed opportunity by continuing to focus exclusively on the security interests there? To the Pakistan side, I would say that although we have enjoyed enormous success, 500% growth year over year, we've got no shortage of demand for energy, as you obviously know, and of customers. It's very difficult for private sector companies to do business there, particularly if you are American. I have the good fortune of having a Pakistani face, and so I can hide the fact that I'm an American with an American company, but it's very difficult to do business there. My chief operations officer is an Australian. He's been denied, regularly gets denied a business visa for operating in Pakistan. The reason given, even though we've got a government contract pending with the government of Sindh and we have good relationships with the Pakistani government, we have not done a good enough job of also establishing ourselves and providing visibility into our operations to the military. And that's given as a reason regularly, for obstacles in our business. So I would like to hear from both of you and get it.
Thanks. And we'll have a panel on the economy tomorrow, and I'm sure we'll discuss energy in detail. Yes, second question.
My name is Fayyaz Naich. I'm from Karachi. I'm a journalist working with Sindh Television Network. My question is with Ms. Laurel Muller, that as we were talking about the Pak-Saudi relations, but I want to know about US-Saudi relations, because everyone knows that 15 out of 19 terrorists belong to the Saudi Arabia, and currently we see that journalist has been killed, but still the Trump administration is not taking any stance against that. How whole of the world want to know that what kind of relations this is, that when we talk about the democracy and human rights and all that, but you have a so close relationship with that kind of regime.
Maybe slightly off topic, but it's a good. It is a good question. Yes, final question right here. The woman in the red. Mike's to your left.
Thank you. This is a question for Dr. Rizvi. I would like to know if you think, with the strong opposition from the PMLN and the People's Party, what do you think the odds are that the PTI is going to be able to succeed?
Well, it's a question about energy, which we're going to discuss tomorrow. So I'm not sure we want to get into that too much. But if someone would make a quick comment, the issue about Saudi Arabia, which I don't know if we want to get into too much, and then the final issue. Does anyone want to respond quickly?
I'll just say something on the economic interests as it relates to the relationship more broadly. First of all, the U.S. government does support U.S. companies in trying to get better access in Pakistan and does work on its economic diplomacy and trying to build up opportunities for American companies in Pakistan through the embassy there, and has hosted investment-related conferences and such. But the idea that in the near term or the clearly foreseeable future, the economic relationship with Pakistan is going to be of such benefit to the U.S. that it is a significant driver in the relationship. I'm hard pressed to see that. It has relevance, but it doesn't outweigh the other factors in the relationship at the moment. I think I'll leave it at that. I'm not an expert on Saudi relations and definitely not going to speak for the U.S. government on that.
All right.
Yes, go ahead.
New Pakistani government has been in office for the last 5 or 6 weeks. Therefore, at the moment, the only thing we can talk about are the challenges which they face. And if they can address challenges, the new leadership and the government can face those challenges, they can succeed. If they don't, then they run into great problem. And I may mention those challenges which are being faced by the new government. The first is the economy and socio-economic development, because Pakistan suffers from acute underdevelopment in socioeconomic domain. That's the basic challenge, and that has been the major promise to the people that situation for them will change in Pakistan. We'll wait and see whether they succeed on that. And other issues that relate to the government are Afghanistan, India, and issue of radicalism in Pakistan. And they're all interrelated. If Pakistan can handle its economy, if the new government can handle its economy, I think it would be easier for them to deal with the situation in Afghanistan, India, and especially radicalism within the society. Thank you.
Make a quick 30-second final comment.
Absolutely. I think the question regarding, the U.S. economic interests, that Pakistan in particular. I think even if you take out Pakistan, basically the most optimistic scenario where you have a political settlement in Afghanistan, intra-Afghan settlement endorsed by the United States, by all Afghans, by Pakistan and the rest of the world. Still, Afghanistan economy will have to be normalized from a war economy to a normal economy. I think there will be opportunities, and that's where the Pakistan's role will eventually come in. As the global community and the region, and especially the US, think about and work to build an economic foundation for sustainable peace. I think we should be focused on that as we try to work out, the political or facilitated intra-Afghan settlement. Without that economic foundation, sustainable peace will not be possible. And therefore, I would tend to think that US could play a very important role in doing that in collaboration with the region as a whole. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, to wrap up, I think the bottom line that we're hearing, that we've heard this morning, is that there is potential for bigger and greater things in this relationship, but I think that other things will need to happen first that neither side may be ready for. And, I bring your attention to a U.S. government document, the National Security Strategy, I believe it was, the one that came out, that the Trump put out last December, in which it said, we look forward to the opportunity to partner with the Pakistanis on trade and investment and broader issues, et cetera. But, and then there's the big but, issues of cross-border terrorism, et cetera, has to be dealt with first. I'm paraphrasing it, but that was the essence of that. And I think that captures the essence of the thinking here. But, the important thing is to have conversations and dialogues like this to try to move beyond some of the troubles and the tensions. So I thank our panelists. We will have a wonderful afternoon after lunch. I think that the logical next step now is to talk about the Afghanistan question. We've all talked about how this could be one place where the two sides could work together, and that will be the subject of our panel. We'll have an American, Pakistani, and an Afghan speaker to discuss that issue with opening comments from the Afghan embassy. We'll have a wonderful panel discussion as well, dealing with the issue of women and entrepreneurship